Okay, well, welcome to the attendees who are joining us. And for those of you who don't know us, I'm Peter Franks. I'm the founder of Neon River and I guess the organizer of this event. And we're a headhunting firm that really specializes in working with technology companies, whether they're internet businesses or software companies or games businesses around the world. And often we get asked to recruit CMOs and other marketing leaders into our clients' organizations. I think marketing is one of those functions that's pretty fundamental for every business, whether it's a B2C or a B2B business. And we're delighted to be bringing together a panel of industry experts who are all accomplished marketeers from different backgrounds. Some are more performance marketing oriented, some are CRM experts, some are experts in brand building, and many of them, of course, have expertise across all these different disciplines. And what we're aiming to do is examine some of the key themes around modern day marketing, what best practice looks like, whether you are a big corporate or whether you're a new business, perhaps trying to build your customer base or trying to build your brands out there in the marketplace. And we've both prepared some questions ourselves, and we're also extremely keen to answer any questions you guys may have from an audience perspective. So feel free to submit any questions you have into the chat functionality within Zoom, and we'll be delighted to ask the panelists any questions you guys might have. And without further ado, I shall hand over to Lisa Rodwell, who is our moderator. I had the pleasure of placing Lisa many, many years ago into Moo. And Lisa, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. As Peter said, my name is Lisa Rodwell, and I'm going to be moderating this panel. I think it's going to be really interesting as you'll meet all the panelists have quite varied experience and kind of deep experts, whether it's influencer marketing or CRM, loyalty specialists, brand building and building on small budgets. Just to give you a quick overview on my own background, I span multiple industries, but it's always been a focus on building consumer brands and businesses online. Started at one of the sort of pioneers of the internet way back when at eBay. But then the last 15 years, I've spent my time in startups. So as Peter said, I was at Moo.com, Wool and the Gang, more recently in FinTech at Nutmeg and Starling. And then now, today, I'm actually juggling two different roles. One at Swift Home. So it's beautiful sofas delivered in 48 hours. And then completely the opposite side, which is Vira Health. And that's a female health company. And our app, Stella, is for menopause relief. So really all over there, all over the place from a brand perspective and also potentially a marketing strategy, but maybe not. One of the things that we wanted to start off talking about was actually creative. One of the things I've noticed is depending upon sort of the marketer's experience, sometimes creative doesn't come first. Often it can be an afterthought after conversations around spend in media, the channels, the tracking, the attribution, the testing, but it feels quite backwards to me. Then again, I could be out of touch. But I'd like to throw the idea of sort of the importance of creative and how one might approach it depending upon whether it's the channel or the industry, does it matter? Thoughts on creative. I'm gonna kick it off by passing this question over to Sami. Sami, first introduce yourself and then take a stab at the very large topic of creative in marketing today.
Thank you, Lisa. Hi, I'm Sami. I come from mainly a user acquisition background, having worked with the likes of King, Jam City, DNA, and Firecraft studios. I'm currently head of growth and marketing for Ascended Studio, who are a small startup. We're actually a completely remote working company. None of us are in the same country at all. So I'm the only lone person in London, and it's working really nicely like that. And yeah, and that's my experience. And so to do to the question that Lisa has put in, yes, creative, especially from a user acquisition standpoint, I think it's probably now more important than ever. I mean, creative has always been important, obviously, but at least in the years that I've worked with, some of these large companies, it's always felt like it, as she said, it's been an afterthought because of new technologies coming through, because of new ways of targeting users. That's always been, seems to have come to, oh, that's the really important thing, that's the really important thing. But forgetting that actually what your prospective user is seeing is the thing that's actually going to draw them into the game in the first place. And that's what's actually going to control the price points that you've got for these users. And as, I mean, a lot of these panels always come up with the, oh, how can you drive down ever increasing user acquisition costs? And I think the first thing you look at is your creative. You know, to try and be a protagonist in creative as opposed to a follower is extremely difficult, but also very important. And you look at things like, you know, I think Match to Mansion was the game that started off the whole sort of fake playable adverts that were doing the rounds on Facebook, and then everybody started following that. And then you've got, I think it was Brickbreaker, who came in with the, because obviously in creatives and on things like Facebook and other mediums, you know, the first 5 seconds is super important in order to actually draw that user in. And you know, this company came up with, I think it's a video of a kid about to hit another kid around the back of the head with a chair. And this kid is playing a game, and then the guy stops trying to hit the guy because the game looks interesting. Then it zooms in, and it's a simple gameplay video. So, you know, little tricks like that will give you an edge in the market nowadays, and will help you drive down your CPI and acquisition. And obviously, relevance it's so much more important than ever. And it's, you know, looking at creative, and I mean, testing is forever difficult. I think lots of companies you're starting to see more automated creative testing, which is great, and actually trying to do what an ad server used to do online years and years and years ago is now starting to become a reality for mobile, at least. But yeah, I'd say to any company, and for us, it's super important, especially when you look at things like the hyper casual genre versus the casual genre, and trying to look at different things that work. I mean, what we're finding with hyper casual games is that actually less noise, the better with any of our creatives. So even though the game might have some really nice bells and whistles and lots of fireworks and everything when you win, actually for the video, green screening it and just having the character and the mechanic actually can give you a much better result and a much lower CPI than having all the bells and whistles that are in the game. So yeah, it's super important in user acquisition, at least.
Interesting. And Sami, just a question. Are you working with creative agencies, or is it all being done in-house? Generally, do you see a scenario that works better for some industries, or at least from your experience, what have you found to be most effective?
From my experience, it's been a mixture of the two, actually. So, for example, I mean, I mentioned that fake playable that was doing the rounds. That was actually created, I believe, by Consumer Acquisition, who are a Facebook buying agency and creative agency. They first did that with Match to Mansion. And so, in my experience, it's a mixture of the two. Obviously, it depends on the teams that you've got as well. Some games designers are more than capable of shooting video and editing it down. Some aren't. With Ascended, for example, because we're not self-publishing at the minute, we're working with third-party publishers. We're very reliant on their user acquisition teams, but then working with them to try and give them the right footage that they can then edit into ads that are, you know, that are good for the audience.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you very much, Matt. You know, kind of obviously in a very similar industry, if you could just first introduce yourself and a little bit about what you do, and the role that creative plays, obviously is critical for what you guys do.
Yeah, I'd love to speak on this topic. So for context, I work in the influencer marketing space. And so I go back to basically the beginning of the mobile esports industry here in North America. And we basically are the largest mobile gaming influencer marketing agency in the West. We also run online events for some of the largest mobile games publishers like Tencent, Supercell, Garena, and more. And what I've come to find and appreciate in influencer marketing is that creatives are something that are incredibly important to get right, because at a very fundamental level in influencer marketing, it relies on the relationship and the bond and the rapport that the audience has with the influencer already in order to be effective. And it's one of the actually most common mistakes that I find when companies are trying to leverage influencer marketing, is that they'll try to come up with a creative on their own, and they'll show the content creator and say, hey, look, do this. And they expect it to be successful. And now granted, these are probably phenomenally talented marketers. It's probably an incredible summary of the value propositions of the product or the service being pitched. But what they miss a lot of the time is that it needs to be authentic from the actual content creator and the influencer themselves in the delivery to the audience. Remember that they've built their audience over time through their own personal style and relationship that they have with their fan base. And so what's most important at the very fundamental level is that you actually give them the creative control in a way to deliver that messaging to their audience in a way that's natural and authentic. Because once you have that authentic excitement about the product and it's in that similar style that the fans already resonate with, that's really setting yourself up for success. And actually over scripting it and having it come across as a bit of an ad, right? An inauthentic pitch is one of the most common mistakes. So it's a little bit of a leap of faith and something that, us in the marketing industry probably, don't enjoy doing a lot of the times, but in influencer marketing, it's so important just to give creative freedom in a limited sense to the content creators in order to deliver the messaging. Now, certainly things like bullet points and key things to hit on in that delivery are certainly great. And making sure that you also tailor the campaign by using the right ways to activate. There's a whole host of social media platforms that have their own unique strategies for success. And so making sure that you design the campaign in a way that really meets your goals. If it's brand awareness, you want to really tag along to things that are going to get the most impressions, right? But if you're trying to drive downloads, find the shortest path to conversion through links that are incredibly present for the viewer. So there's definitely tips and tricks for influencer marketing, but it's one of those that is a bit unique, I think, in the marketing industry.
Yeah, well, we're going to be talking a little bit more about influencer marketing as we go forward, but I'm just curious, from a marketer's perspective, when they're working with your influencers, do they actually get to see the final creative before it goes live, or is it a bit of a leap of faith before that happens?
Yeah, that's a great question. So every client is different. We certainly do always offer the ability to have a draft submitted and approved. And certainly if it's a company that's getting into this for the first time, we do, we walk them through the process every step of the way. So, but there are also activations that are, in live streams, right? And in that kind of conduit, you don't have the ability to do a draft. So it can be a little bit of both.
Yeah. Natalie, did you want to add a few points to that?
Yeah, I think it's, I guess, really useful and interesting perspective from an influencer point of view. My background is data, direct and digital. I spent a lot of time working in loyalty and customer engagement. And I think creative, for me, is always important to remember that's what connects people and brands visually. People make decisions based on emotion, not logical kind of rational beings at all. And creative has the power to incite an emotion and to inspire, and is really powerful, therefore, in how we influence consumers. So I think it's really important to, you made an interesting point at the beginning. Does the creative come first, or does the creative come second? The other point I think is that creative consistency across channels, particularly in today's age where consumers are reacting and interacting across lots of different touch points, that creative consistency is really important for memorability.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Thanks very much. And that actually leads us into our next topic, sort of. When we think about creativity, I think we definitely need a lot of it when we have limited budgets. And I personally am I actually have worked with a lot of small budgets rather than the big budgets for some time. And I do think they force you to think harder on how to stretch what budget you have, and for maximum bang, to your point, Natalie, about like what's going to really connect with consumers. So while we have people here on the panel who've worked with really big budgets, I'm going to start actually with Adam, who you might look at his background and think, oh my goodness, he's worked for Dyson and Innocent, amongst others. He must not be used to working with small budgets, but he's up for the challenge. So I'll hand it over to him to give us his thoughts on what can be done with a small budget, but also please introduce yourself.
Hi, so I'm Adam, and yeah, I I've worked for big companies. I went to big brand marketing school at Unilever and was taught everything that I needed to know about how to do it big style, but then also jumped out to join Innocent Smoothies when there were about 20 people in the office too. So I've done the big thing and also done the small thing too. Since then, I've run marketing for Dyson and also really found a home in scale-ups, so with OVO Energy and Babylon Health too. I think the real contrast was jumping out of Unilever, which is a great place to work, but to go to Innocent. And I think one of the interesting things at Innocent was that we didn't have that much cash. And so therefore, when you don't have that much cash, it forces you to be creative in different ways. You have to build your brand in different ways too. So be it from just writing on the back of your bottles and posting your job adverts there, to sampling. Like we used to give away all our short life smoothies. We're going to go off fairly soon. We just gave them away to people. We never made anyone ill, but we made sure that people got in-date smoothies before they went off, give them a chance to taste things. And then, you know, knitting little woolly hats and putting them on the bottles, etc. So I think great creativity can come from a place where you have constraints, and it will force you to be creative in different ways, as opposed to, you know, if you had all the money in the world and just thinking, hey, what can I do next? I think sometimes that can be a great trigger for creativity, and you can do some big and bold things, but I think it might lead you down the easy route. So yeah, I mean, I think it does prompt the question then, if you want to build that brand, and you don't have those constraints, maybe at brief writing stage, maybe you might want to introduce a false constraint. How could we do this really quickly? How could we do it on half the budget? If we were someone else, how would we do it? All these sorts of other questions or provocations that you can build in to force that sort of creativity. If you do have more money, or if you're in that great stage of being a startup, it's really about focusing on the things that are quick, easy, cheap to do to help you build your brand.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think my experience has been very similar to what you were talking about at Innocent, is looking at the free touch points you have with your consumers, and how can you use them in a creative way, like creating a true sort of connection or dialogue with those influential consumers early on. You know, when you end up with a large media budget, you don't look for those small little tweaks. And I think going back to looking at the product and the customer experience, and how can you not only exploit it, but make it better, make it remarkable, do things that get people talking about you early on. One of the things that we did, and this is an early on one, at moo.com, again, we were kind of similar, I guess, to Innocent. We used to look up to Innocent with quite a bit of admiration in the early days, but we had an order confirmation email, like back in 2006, and everybody else had an order confirmation email. But we actually thought about, well, how can we make this more interesting and something worth talking about, maybe sharing, to demonstrate to consumers that actually this brand was fun and creative and could reflect their own personality. So we introduced the idea of Little Moo, which was the software that managed Big Moo, which was the printer. And it was just written from Little Moo's perspective. And we used to get love letters all the time through customer service. People would take pictures of it and post it on, back in the day, it was Flickr and on Instagram. And, you know, a year later, they would share it on Twitter. So I think for sure it's looking for all those connection points, and also obviously network effects. You know, everybody says, what can we do to create the next viral video, which I can't stand that expression. Maybe people have stopped saying that. Anyway, you've just reminded me of one point, similar. As Innocent scaled and got bigger, we started to do bigger things like TV, etc. And in the Harvard Business Review paper that they did on Innocent and their growth, I remember sharing one thing about them, which was about a kind of an approach that we had, I coined, called big brand, little brand. So for every big brand thing we did, we also had to kind of not match it one for one, but make sure we were doing those other little brand things that would add the personality and differentiation. So every time we did TV, we'd go and do woolly hats. If we got a massive listing in Sainsbury's sent us national, then we would do something like throw a festival, just to make sure we had that credibility as we scaled, rather than just resorting to the bigger and easier things to do as well. I love that idea. And I think a lot of fast growing D2C brands right now who are, on the up, but then very soon are spending a lot in traditional media to maintain what made them special. I think that's just a nice little sort of hack that you can do. Peter, did you want to jump in or?
I don't have any value to add in terms of marketing best practice,
Okay.
but I do have a question for the panel.
All right.
Sometimes I talk to candidates, and sometimes candidates say to me, look, I've got a CEO or a founder or a manager of some kind who doesn't really believe in brand marketing. Sometimes you get folks that are very, performance marketing oriented, and obviously brand building is somewhat more, somewhat different from that. It's not a pure science in that sense. How would the panel approach managing, I guess, a boss who maybe doesn't value brand marketing as much as they should?
Does anybody would like to take that one?
I will. I mean,
Okay.
I think the easiest thing to do, it's not just the CEO, it's the CFO as well.
Yeah, probably more so.
Yeah, go to a white space. Like, 'cause typically in performance, you're going to max out. You're going to get to all the efficiencies in your funnel and get to a great place where typically you're quite well optimized and things are ticking okay on performance. But then it comes to a point where you just go, well, I need to fill the top of that funnel. How am I going to do this? Like, you can't just keep on hijacking people who are on the consumer journey of, say, buying a vacuum cleaner. At some point, you'll max out. You'll be as efficient as you can. And then you need to actually, a vacuum cleaner is a bad example, but like if you're trying to establish a new category, you're going to max out on people. And then at that point, you need to try and grow the category. And the only way to do that really is to do more work at the top of the funnel. And essentially that means some sort of broadcast marketing that will, and it's dumb not to do that and grow your brand. I mean, the way I've done it, the way I've seen it done best is to go to a white space, go to a different city or a different territory and to test something, to scale and get the numbers that prove the need to scale it. And that's a really easy thing to do. So it's an easy argument to have if you can say, well, okay, we went to Birmingham, we tried it in Birmingham, and these are the impacts it had on our results. And typically what I found is that when you do that top of funnel activity and do that brand building, what it does is pulls more people into the funnel, but then also massively reduces your CPAs, increases your conversion and reduces your digital CPAs further down. So usually it's a good story to sell back into the business.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to just jump into our next topic. We're going through everything today, but customer relationships obviously are massive for building the brand, and investing in a sort of well thought out, intelligent CRM strategy puts customer first could make the difference in a brand success. It looks at improving first time conversion rates, the lifetime value of a consumer. It improves referral efficiency. So I'd like us to spend a couple minutes talking about CRM in 2021, sort of the one-to-one or one-to-many comms. Way back when I worked at Ogilvy and Mather Direct, before it was even called Ogilvy One. So we've been trying to have these sort of one-to-one relationships with consumers for years, but now, or more recently, we've had the ability to do it because of the data and channels that we have to talk with our consumers. But then came along GDPR, and has that changed what we can do? How has that changed CRM, and what scenario has that put us in? Natalie, if you could introduce yourself, well, with a bit of your background and comment on that.
Sure, thank you, Lisa. So yeah, I've mentioned before, my background is data, direct and digital. I've always been passionate through my career about championing the customer experience internally in an organization and helping businesses as a result increase customer value through leveraging data and through connecting messaging and media, or integrating messaging and media. And I've been really fortunate in my career both to work within client organizations like Wix, Currys PC World, Carphone Warehouse, but also for agencies who are challenging those organizations to try and push the boundaries of what's possible. And actually, across those different experiences, it all comes back to a really similar thing from my perspective, which is how do we connect, or how do we better connect customer experiences across their journeys with brands. I think technology evolution obviously has given us more tools to do more sophisticated things. We've got more data, explosion of data through digital channels, but the challenges that businesses face in doing that remain the same. Now, there's been a tendency, I think, with reduced costs in these channels to be really tactical, actually, about doing things because we can afford to. And GDPR just really makes us step back and remind ourselves that this is about the consumer experience first. And I think the fundamental thing to remember with GDPR is it's about giving consent. It's consent-based marketing, which it always ought to have been, and it forces us to give that control to the consumer. And as a result of that, it means we have to look after that consent. So engaging consumers and serving them what we've promised to serve them in it and continuing to engage them in new and exciting ways becomes even more important. But fundamentally, the principle of what we're doing here doesn't change at all.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about when you talk about the consent that we've always sort of had, and we need to respect that. And I want to actually ask Adam about CRM, and I'm putting you a bit on the spot, and perhaps you'll have a comment on this or not, but working at Babylon, where personal data is clearly so incredibly stringent, does that actually hold you back from using it to be more personal in some of your communications, because potentially your patients feel like you're stepping over the line? And it's just, it may not be an issue at all. It's just something that sort of came to me when I was thinking about CRM and what and your situation with so many people and so many people's like a real connection to their lives, given how much information you must have on them.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a general principle when it comes to GDPR, just building on what Natalie was saying, is that once they're in, and that, once they're consented, then you're reasonably free to, to run your CRM in a way that, is in line with all the consents they provided. So that's fairly straightforward. Obviously, getting the consent is a key part of what we need to do. As you shift geographies, though, things get trickier or just different. So we think GDPR is bad. We also have this thing called HIPAA in the USA, which really can be very strict and stringent about how you communicate with people, what information you can put, say, in an email that alludes to their medical conditions, etc., etc. So that does make things rather, reasonably hard. I think what's interesting to me now is that we're talking about marketing here, but actually the way we're executing CRM at Babylon is really that it's becoming an extension of product. So, if you look at what Babylon does, which is trying to help people, navigate their health journeys, essentially you could look at Babylon as a big next best action engine for someone saying, okay, I've got a headache. What's the next best action for me? Do I need to speak to a doctor? Do I need to take, some aspirin or whatever it might be? And CRM is very much about next best action. And what's quite cool about what's happening in the technology side of CRM at the moment is that, if you've got the right technology like Braze, for example, you can really execute some things that would take developers or engineers, like the product team, quite a long time to build. You can execute that through that interface. So we can have customized landing pages and build out all those sort of next best action routes in quite a precise way. So we can trial things and get things up and running quicker than necessarily touching product with it. So again, I guess to go back to your question, within the bounds of within the bounds of consent, and also clearly within the local laws, etc., we are able to do quite a lot of stuff that's nimble and quite agile using CRM rather than product.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Braze, which I haven't used personally, but I've looked at their technology, and it seems like, to me, again, it goes back to this holy grail of what I wanted to be able to do 25, 30 years ago. And the fact that it is, I mean, I might be giving a bit of a advertisement here, but it seems like it's not a lot of development after development is done. It's very much managed by the marketer. Is that the case, Adam?
Yeah, that's what we're finding.
One other question that's come out of this, and it was you've already commented on it, but maybe Natalie, you have a thought, or someone else, which is, Where should the CRM team sit in the sort of modern organizational structure? You mentioned, Adam, that maybe it sits within product marketing or product itself. Natalie, do you have have you seen certain trends with your clients or previous roles? You're on mute, perhaps?
Sorry. I think the trend that I'm seeing more increasingly is the question actually being asked, and organizations not necessarily being sure themselves where it should sit. For me, it fundamentally is a marketing, part of marketing. But of course, as Adam said, different organizations are leaning towards the product value and the technology value of it. Actually, the question I think to ask first is, what does CRM mean? And in many organizations, CRM equals email.
Yes.
The first thing I think is to step back and remember that CRM means relationship marketing through whatever channel and whatever touch point consumers are interacting with each other and with ourselves. And so actually it's become a really customer-centered part of the organization that's often been forgotten or sort of put into the background of executional kind of back end below the line, and I think deserves to be moved much more front and center in order to really play a role and drive value in the overall customer experience.
Yeah, I do not like the term below the line, but that's for another panel. Sami, you have some thoughts around organizational structure?
Yeah, I mean, for me, CRM, at least in my industry, is very important as regards to user acquisition, actually, because obviously we're bringing the users in. Now, CRM in games is actually keeping them there. You've got the product to keep them there, but it's also keeping them within your portfolio. So things like cross-promotion would be considered CRM, because that's customer relationship management, and making sure they're not leaving your portfolio of games or leaving your business. So, I mean, in the last few roles that I've had, not including Ascended, I've always pushed to have either a member of the CRM team sit with user acquisition, or at least part of that functionality, such as cross-promotion, be handled by user acquisition with a CRM member.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing, really, the impact that CRM has on the entire customer experience, because that's what it is. And it's right from first finding out about the product or brand to, the whole lifetime value and referrals. So thank you. Okay, we're going to move on again, shifting direction, but kind of coming back to where we started, but on influencer marketing. Matt, I think we're going to have to get you to provide us a bit of an overview on kind of the advantages and how you've seen it evolving every day, month, year, and I think even how people define what influencer marketing, or how they should define what it is. If you could give us a little 101 on it. And perhaps another thing to comment on is, how much should we be looking at ROI of influencer marketing, and how can we do that? And maybe there are some really direct sales responses in some influencer marketing, but what about just sort of the brand influencer marketing? Anyway, lots of questions there, Matt.
I got them all. No problem. I mean, so first of all, let me start kind of at a high level. It seems like nowadays anybody can call themselves an influencer, as long as you've got a decent enough social media platform. The term gets thrown around so much, and I actually almost prefer a different term that's used a little bit more in the East, which is key opinion leader. And that is essentially what it does. It illustrates that your audience is really only as valuable as you're able to help them to form opinions on certain topics, because that is the actual ROI that you're talking about, right? Is the value for an advertiser or a sponsor to come along and tap into those channels. But influencer marketing really, in essence, is about validation. So you are working with a content creator that has an existing relationship with their audience, and by association, you are able to really jump people down the sales funnel to more adequately, consider your product and what you're offering. And so that, I think, is the primary value, is that because of that rapport and relationship with the actual influencer that's communicating your product, you're getting a much more receptive audience. And it also does a great job of displaying your product or service at its best. And so I work in the mobile games industry. As an example, we will have content creators that will actually be playing the game and showing off the best moments that a player can experience, right? But it catapults the user right to those moments. They don't need to sit down, download the game, go through the tutorial, and have all of these extra steps. They're able to see the game at its best and get them interested. And so there's a few different, advanced strategies that I'd love to mention here that,
Please do.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think the best companies that leverage influencer marketing do is they take advantage of evergreen content, it's called, which is essentially just content that stays relevant over long periods of time. Certainly there are going to be some things that are time sensitive. If there's a game update that releases and there's a limited time mode, you want to make sure that there's some content around that for sure. But what you're able to do is actually really maximize the long tail views that you're able to get on this content if it's still relevant for months and years to come, right? So if you are trying to leverage influencer marketing, consider what ways you can do to piggyback off of content that's going to stay relevant over time. And then there's also pillar content. So in addition to the actual posts that content creators will make, there's a lot that the brand themselves can do to leverage that content and create their own material through licensing of that content. So, it could be, separate advertisements that are used only as, pre-rolls on YouTube as an example. But it really stems from content that a single creator was paid to make, but you're able to get so much more value out of it. So one other thing that I think is very important, we're also seeing a lot of larger advertisers in influencer marketing start to also converge creators through special events. And that can actually lead to a lot of shared costs. I recall Adam earlier was talking about hosting festivals. And certainly one of the great ways that we as a company have been able to get a bunch of content creators together in one place are through these types of special events, either online or live. But you're able to really come across cost savings when content creators are able to, bundle certain things together in a package, of course, because for content creators, they're really looking for stability, not just financially, of course, but also they want consistency with their audience. They don't want to be hopping around from brand to brand and really coming across as a highly sponsored, channel. So they want that consistency. It ends up being better for all parties, but you're able to do some pretty creative things by leveraging a single creator, yes, in their own channels and their own content, but also bringing them together through special events with other content creators as well.
So in that case, if you have multiple content creators, do you end up working with multiple brands, or is it sort of one brand to many content creators?
Usually it starts with a brand and we formulate that strategy to activate across multiple creators, but certainly also depends on the client and what their, their target is, if they want to reach specific regions or, something like that. But absolutely. There's also kind of the inverse of that as well, where a content creator will have their own strategy for how they integrate brands into their channels. And so we work with also the influencers in actually forming their own strategy, because that is important as well.
Interesting. Sami, you had something to add? Or did you?
Nope, sorry, I forgot to lower my hand from the last time. I do apologise.
No problem, no problem. I'll just give maybe a few points about my experience with influencers. It's really interesting to meet people like Matt and to see a completely different industry than how we used influencers we'd use them at Wool and the Gang, which our influencers were models as well as knitters, so quite different. And interestingly, we had two different strategies. We did it all in-house, which as a small business, it takes a lot of resource. And I think now, this was 3 years ago, I think now the whole landscape has changed and maybe we couldn't work with some of the bigger influencers we were able to. But I love the idea of micro influencers for a particular, for us, because we were going after makers and they're a unique group and aren't necessarily, there isn't necessarily one key opinion leader. Actually, there's very few, but there's multiple people who are trying to just really share and sort of pop up above the rest. So we were able to develop relationships with them that weren't very expensive, that probably were more resource intensive. But we were always looking for relationships that actually benefited both of us. So whether it was helping them get more audience, whether it was giving them a discount, whether it was giving them even a platform that they've never had before by doing a collab with us. So I think, you know, depending upon the industry you work in, influencer marketing may look very, very different. And I think there are small ways to kind of enter into it without a lot of investment. But it is one of those things that I'd love to hear if anyone else has done anything recently in the influencer marketing space. Anyone else, or any interesting? Yeah, Adam.
I just wanted to talk quickly about influencers and Dyson. Now, I can't take credit for this one. It's happened, you know, as I was leaving. But clearly, Dyson, you know, they make vacuum cleaners that suck dirt out of your carpets, and their whole positioning was about power and engineering prowess. So I was involved in the development of the hairdryer, and there was a fairly big brand question there, which is how could you get like mostly females to trust you with one of their kind of most treasured assets, their beautiful hair, and how do we kind of flip our brands, you know, to be able to build that trust with people and get them to spend, you know, the best part of £300, I think, on a hairdryer. And it's a long story short, because that wasn't my execution, but the influencer strategy was absolutely critical to get people, you know, to be, you know, visible on social, saying, you know, I tried the Dyson. These are the results I had, on a low key micro level, but also then getting, like, you know, the big guys, like I think Karl Lagerfeld bought 2 for his cats or his dogs. I can't remember what it was as well. So there's the big kind of hero stuff, but also the low key stuff that actually really enabled them to drive that launch through. Plus then some of the older stuff, like, you know, the more traditional stuff, like getting people in your Debenhams or in Sephora and just having that live demonstration as well, so that people could see and get their hands on the technology. I guess that all counts as influence, and it all builds to that critical thing, which is word of mouth. And that's what you need to really build that brand.
Yeah, I love those stories. I can just imagine those cats. Anyway, Peter, over to you.
Yeah, layperson's question, I guess, on influencer marketing. Because it strikes me that, and maybe this is completely wrong, but there might be 2 broadly kinds of influencer. You've got your, you know, big, you know, mass market, you know, social media celebrity type personas, your Khloe Kardashians of the world. And then obviously you've got a much longer tail of very niche, very specific interests. You might be the person who's the expert at reviewing SUV cars, or somebody who's an expert in Japanese RPG games, or whatever it might be. And I would imagine that, I guess, the value that these kinds of influence can add will vary a little bit. I would imagine that obviously the niche guys give you access to a very specific audience that you might not be able to easily reach through other means. And presumably for the kind of more mass market influencers, they've just got a reach that compares favorably with other kinds of mass market advertising. Is that the right way of looking at it, I guess?
Yeah, certainly. And, you know, you can dive even deeper. And I think that we have, you know, 8 tiers internally that we measure content creators by. But broadly speaking, I definitely agree with that. You do have people that have that mass market appeal, you know, the celebrities that are, you know, hometown names, or, you know, just something that everybody will recognize, right? And so you can really leverage them in a lot of creative ways. But then, like you mentioned, there are a lot of very niche industries that you can tap into very directly. And that's becoming increasingly difficult now, especially with so many regulations about privacy and cookies. And you're starting to really know your audience a little bit less than you have in the past. Whereas with influencer marketing, you know exactly what genre your audience is in and what they're interested in, because they're actively searching out content about these topics. And to Adam's point, actually, this is a funny anecdote too, but I had bought a vacuum cleaner recently, and I actually did that after watching YouTube videos about it. And so even just sending products to a content creator that is covering, you know, that space will allow them to do a product demo and actually speak to the product itself. So definitely something that's even relevant in vacuum cleaners.
Sami, did you want to comment on that, or is your hand still up?
Yes, no, this is actually not a mistake this time.
Right.
Actually, talking about that, it's really interesting that obviously the targeting that you have with influencers and knowing their audience so well. I won't say which company it was, but one of the companies I worked for did a big influencer campaign, and they treated it as a user acquisition tool anyway, which I think influencers is somewhere in between anyway. I think it can work both ways. But interestingly, as a user acquisition campaign, it was a huge failure with big CPIs. And the reason behind that is basically because the target audience was too perfect, that this company already had them without realizing. And so obviously as a user acquisition tool, it wasn't worth doing. So I guess there's always going to be that kind of risk as well.
Yeah, that's a really interesting comment. Like, is there anything that a brand or company can do to see what the overlap might be with their existing customer base? And is it even allowed anymore? I don't know, Matt, if you have any insight into that, or Sami, if you do.
Yeah, I can speak very quickly on that. There's been a lot of movement over the last couple of years to give creators the tools and the analytics they need to know their audience. So all primary social media platforms have phenomenal analytics backends so that creators can actually understand that data and use it proactively to grow their channels, right? So they know what regions to be targeting, when to post, because their audience is online during specific hours of the day more than others. And so that's very relevant, and certainly something that we advise as well to clients out of the gates, and take into consideration ourselves in designing campaigns, which is making sure that there is product market fit and that we're actually hitting the demographics that clients want, because it's not always apparent on the surface. And mobile gaming is another great example of that, because we can have a content creator that lives in the United States, is producing content in English, but has the majority of his viewers in India because the game is more popular there. And so very common misconception, especially in this industry, I'm sure Sami can speak to this too, but there's lots of misses because of that. So certainly, do your due diligence and researching on your own as a brand in order to identify creators that you may want to work with, but always ask for analytics and demographic data before finalizing.
Good point. Yeah, like, do not make the assumptions that those numbers equate to your region or exactly who those numbers are. I was going to actually ask if anyone in the audience, if anyone has specific questions. If not, I'm going to kind of bring it back to some of the other areas we were talking about earlier. If you do have a question, just plop it into the chat. We really are open to talk about a variety of topics. As you can see, we've gone from influencer marketing, brand CRM, to small budgets. Actually, I wanted to come back to actually CRM, or the idea of putting the customer first, because we hear that quite often, not necessarily just in CRM, but in marketing, or as a business strategy, we're going to put the customer first. What do you think that really means, and how can perhaps CRM enable it, but maybe other marketing strategies? I know, Natalie, you had been thinking about this particular question, so can I put that to you?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a great question. And all too often as businesses, we're kind of focused on our commercial objectives and the promotions. And one of the risks perhaps of CRM sitting so closely or within a product environment is that the focus is on what we're trying to achieve as a business, rather than what the customer is telling us they want. I guess the obvious role that CRM has to play is data. So being able to capture those signals. We have incredible technology available today that allows us to do that. If we have a great data strategy to support it, looking for those signals, asking questions of the data to analyze and predict what we think consumers want or how they're responding to things, and drawing that insight back into our marketing strategy at the top. But all too often I see us, businesses that I've either worked for or worked with fall into that kind of easier tactical route of using CRM equals email as a channel to push out promotions, and customers then actually receiving conflicting messages, which is completely the opposite thing that we need to do in order to grow value.
Yeah, I would agree.
Adam,
Yeah.
I mean, as just dragging, like connecting your question there to the one previously we were talking about startups, I think there's an interesting point about putting the customer first. And all too often when you're a startup, out of 10, it's like, we are the customers. They're people like us. So therefore, it's really, really easy to put the customer first. But then, you know, if you scale and you get into proximal categories, or you're like a Unilever, when I got put on stock cubes for housewives, right? You know, in the Middle East, I'm not the customer. And I think there's a real job there. So I guess it's a personal job for us as marketeers. You have to balance being, we are the customer, we understand, you know, what we need because we're really connected to the product. You have to flex that with building your gut feel, really building your consumer understanding as well, because it's going to be impossible for you to put the customer first without really getting under the skin of what they need, getting out there, meeting people, doing exercises like consumer shoes, you know, really interrogating customers to the point where you actually can almost live and breathe their wants and needs. And of course, there's all sorts of newer ways of doing quant research, faster bits of research as well that are super valuable in that endeavor.
Yeah, that's completely true. And I think sometimes it's better when you're not the consumer, because otherwise it's always like, I think, or you hear that a lot. And really, I mean, that's where everybody's a marketer. Sami, did you have some thoughts on this one?
Yes, absolutely. It suddenly reminded me what you said actually when I worked on Manchester Mansion right at the beginning with launching the game. I made a big point with our team that we kept scouring Facebook for any fan-made pages about the game and made sure we connected with them, made sure we're on the pages, but also giving them exclusive content for the pages, listening to their frustrations with the game and making those changes as a result, because the people that create, you know, they are your key audience, the ones that create those kind of pages. So keeping with them is super important.
Yeah, they're your super fans, and sometimes when, depending upon the brand, you get a little bit too big for your britches and you forget about them. But these are all these micro influencers that make such a difference. One area that I think has been, depending upon the business you're working on, but I know on two of the businesses, actually three of the businesses I'm working on right now, has been part of our conversation a lot over the last, say, 2 months, is sort of the rising cost of digital channels, particularly, at least from my perspective, we've seen it as a result of Facebook's algorithm being challenged a bit with the new iOS 14. So I'm wondering, have you found, either on the businesses you're working on or other brands that you're looking at, anyone looking at new channels or channels that aren't the top of the list, particularly the performance, Google and Facebook? Has there been much in sort of exploration of spend against podcasts, or I don't know what specifically?
I mean, for just to butt in, sorry, for
go for it.
Standpoint and from a hyper casual game standpoint, TikTok has become a huge channel now, where we are seeing extremely low CPIs with not bad engagement either, but obviously the content you use on TikTok has to be slightly different, and that goes back to the creative. Right, what we started right at the beginning is making those cultural differences to your creative so that they're relevant to the channel you're going on. But definitely TikTok's really gone up there, and that's been quite sudden, because this time last year, or this time a year and a half ago, TikTok wasn't successful for a lot of games companies, and now it's actually becoming a big one. Interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, I've seen it on a lot of sort of channels to explore on some brands that maybe it feels a little bit distant, and just, I'm not a massive TikTok user, but when I do go in there, they seem to manage to find me as someone to advertise to. Anyone else had experiences with TikTok?
Yeah, we actually represent some of the largest gaming creators on TikTok, and I can speak to that for sure. So one of the ways that we've seen companies really leverage them is to jumpstart a bit of a content engine around a specific hashtag or a campaign that they'd like to go viral on TikTok. And influencer marketing is phenomenal for that, because you're able to actually, jump through this chicken and the egg scenario where you need people creating content about the hashtag, and then you also need people viewing it, right? And so you're able to really jumpstart that out of the gates, get some large influencers involved, and start a movement, if you will. And so that's certainly one of the best use cases for influencer marketing on TikTok, is to do something that will actually snowball. And then as far as underrated things, actually, I have a couple here, but I'll make this brief. YouTube, of course, is one of the foundations for content, right? With just how popular it is for videos on demand. But they even are rolling out a bit of a platform within the platform by way of the YouTube community tabs. So this may be a bit under the radar for a lot of people, but every YouTube channel also has the ability to post a text post onto their channel that will also go out to their audience. And that's called the community tab. And that's essentially just
is that a new introduction, or has it been around forever and I just haven't seen it?
I think it's only been around for about a year, but they continue to lean into it. And actually it can drive a lot more engagement than it would on a regular social media post on Twitter or another platform with that same influencer, because you're tapping directly into their YouTube audience. And one of the things that's specifically effective on that is polls. And so just as a normal consumer, a viewer, you'll be just scrolling on your YouTube app or web page, and you'll see essentially a text post or a poll pop up on that feed, just as it might on any social platform. But it's a nice under the radar way to engage that YouTube audience in a way for the creator also that isn't very intrusive. It's not a sponsored video or something. So it's very, very easy for them to pop up.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for sharing that. I might have to look into that for one or two of the brands I work with. We're kind of rounding up to the hour. It's 3 minutes beforehand. Is there any, there you are, Peter, I was looking for you. Is there any last points from you, Peter, that you wanted to pick up before we said a thank you to the rest of the panel?
No, I mean, I think it's been a fascinating discussion, and I'm really grateful for you and obviously the panel taking the time to do this. It's much appreciated. I know you're obviously very busy with your other demands. And also just want to say, look, thank you to the audience for taking the time to join us. I hope it's been a useful and interesting discussion from your perspective. And if you're interested in joining any of our future events, our next one is on the future of mobile gaming. And it's in early August. So obviously you have my contact details, so let me know if you're interested in attending. And thank you everybody for being a part of this one. It's much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. We shall leave it here, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Take care. Cheers.
Thanks so much, Peter.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.